Welcome on this Sunday after Pentecost. Our sermon for today is based on Genesis chapter 18, verses 1 through 15, and Genesis 21, verses 1 through 7. And the Lord appeared to Abraham at the door of his tent in the heat of the day. He lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, 3 men stood in front of him. When he saw them, he ran from the tent door to meet them and bowed himself to the earth and said, "My Lord, if I have found favor in your sight, do not pass by your servant. Let a little water be brought and wash your feet and rest yourselves under the tree while I fetch a morsel of bread that you may refresh yourselves. And after that you may pass on, since you have come to your servant." They said to him, "Where is Sarah, your wife?" And he said, "She is in the tent." The Lord said, "I will surely return to you in the spring, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." And Sarah was listening in the tent door behind him. Now Abraham and Sarah were old, advanced in age. It had ceased to be with Sarah after the manner of women. So Sarah laughed to herself, saying, "After I have grown old and my husband is old, shall I have pleasure?" The Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah laugh and say, 'Shall I indeed bear a son, and now I am old?' Is anything too hard for the Lord? At the appointed time I will return to you in the spring, and Sarah shall have a son." But Sarah denied, saying, "I did not laugh," for she was afraid. He said, "No, but you did laugh." The Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called his son Isaac. Abraham was 100 years old when his son Isaac was born to him. And Sarah said, "God has made laughter for me. Everyone who hears will laugh over me." Here ends our reading. Laughter. It has got to be one of the strangest phenomena in the human response system. Why do humans laugh? Researchers found that humans use laughter to express what cannot be said in any other way. Laughter is spontaneous. We may laugh when something tickles our funny bones, but we also laugh when we find ourselves in absurd, unusual situations, when our lives feel utterly hopeless, meaningless, senseless. Laughter seems to be the only response. Somehow, by laughing, the situation becomes lighter, or at least we remove ourselves from it for a time. Laughing alters our emotional perspective in a serious situation, something that's beyond our control. And it prevents us from drowning in it or believing in it too much. Laughter suspends reality. When we laugh, we are suddenly removed from the gravity of our plight, and we transcend it, if you will, even if only for a brief time. This provides an emotional respite, a needed relief. But this response doesn't just relieve us emotionally. We know that laughter also has physical benefits, such as lowering our blood pressure or boosting our heart rate or producing antibodies which strengthen our immune system. It's no joke. The cancer patients who laugh frequently and have a positive attitude about life actually improve a little more and live a little longer. Laughter makes you feel better. It lifts you up. It improves your mood. If you keep laughing, eventually you'll feel more positive and more optimistic and more hopeful. When things get too serious, too awful, to the point of absurdity, you just need to laugh. It's like a shout of protest in the face of circumstances beyond one's control. That mundane sadness of life, the moving in of walls, the feeling of being boxed in. Laughter is a kind of breaking free from those cages, if you will, and kind of a spit in the eye of the darker side of life. Laughter is our deep outburst of defiance against the gravity of the world. It is God's gift to the human spirit, the ultimate defiance to the hopelessness and to death. Laughter takes us by surprise. Laughter is a miracle in that it levitates our spirit and our mood. It lifts us up out of our grounded reality and into a place of hope and belief and faith and the demand for a different truth. Laughter can sometimes be deep joy resonating and bubbling up from the depths of the soul in the face of trouble or sin or sadness and hopelessness. It can sometimes be equally absurd, kind of a nonsensical shout at the absurdity of senselessness of the world that we live in. Things just don't make sense, so sometimes we have to laugh. But laughter can also burst forth as a spontaneous relief in response to something that's totally unexpected as a miracle. When God surprises us with a miracle that seems so ridiculous and far-fetched that all we can do is burst out laughing. It's a laugh of relief for an impossible rescue, a disbelief in the face of extreme grace, the gratitude of an impossible response to what seems like an equally impossible situation. This is the kind of laughter that we see today in Genesis chapter 18, in that story of Abraham and Sarah. Abraham and Sarah had longed for a child, but Sarah was barren. In her old age, long after physically being able to bear a child, the Lord comes and appears to Abraham in the form of 3 men and told Abraham and Sarah that she would become pregnant and bear a son. And hearing this from a distance, Sarah bursts out laughing. And at first, Sarah is frightened that God heard her laugh. And she didn't want God to interpret that laughter as like a rude disbelief. Sarah's laughter was actually the recognition of God's miracle. God's absurd and impossible miracle in the midst of her barren reality. And yet God is not angry, but God affirms Sarah's laughter. And when Sarah bears her son, Isaac, she names him after that laughter that God blessed her with. The word Isaac means he will laugh. He will rejoice. It's derived from the Hebrew verb which means to laugh. Sarah's laughter acknowledges God's power to defy the rules of nature, to defy our worldly expectations and logic, to supersede even the parameters of our own faith. Laughter is Sarah's response, perhaps spontaneous response, of gratitude and joy and faith in God's miraculous presence in her seemingly ordinary and old life. God created laughter for just such divine absurdities, particular times. Not only must we laugh in the midst of despair, but we must also spontaneously rejoice in God's very presence. In the scriptures, we see signs of God's divine absurdity everywhere. We see it in Sarah's pregnancy, in Elizabeth's pregnancy, in Mary's pregnancy, in the sprouting of Aaron's rod, in the power of Moses' staff, in the parting of the Red Sea and the Jordan River, in the miracles of Jesus, even in the unsure Peter, who was then named as the rock of God's church, and the persecutor Paul, who was then named the evangelist of God's kingdom. The most divinely absurd action in all of God's history culminates with the resurrection of Jesus from the tomb. As God actually kind of laughs in the face of death, because God reigns over death when he raises Jesus. Because he raises Jesus, he knows that all of us also are promised that gift, that final victory. In the face of COVID-19, in the face of rubber bullets and tear gas in the last week or so, in the face of loss of jobs and homes and tears and sadness and depression and frustration, God invites us to laugh at the realization that we too can and will experience all kinds of resurrection in our lives, and the ultimate resurrection in our death. Laughter is a form of freedom. It releases us from the tensions and bonds of our despair, and it lifts us into a place of faith. Faith in God's ability to act in this world and in our lives at any moment. Faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. That's what the author of Hebrews in chapter 11, verse 1 says. For every Christian, for every human being created and sanctified by God, faith is that irrational force that laughs in the face of darkness and barrenness and danger and despair, and believes in fountains in the deserts and water gushing up from the dry wells and olive trees in the winter and new life emerging from dead seas and all of the things that we hear about in the scriptures. Faith knows that God's miracles can always transcend sin and evil, restoring meaning and hope to this world. So laugh, people of God. Let your laughter burst forth and bubble up and well within you, because God is here in the midst of our turmoil and our fear, in the midst of our worry and our pain, telling us that a miracle is just around the corner. And get this, laughter is contagious. It's communal, it's connecting, it's healing, and it's a sign of hope. Every time that you laugh, you lift someone else near you just a little bit higher and convince them that life's going to be better and that divine miracles really are real. We need to fight the viruses of this world, both biological and social, with some good, strong, uncontainable laughter and a whole lot of faith. Today and always, may your laughter be unstoppable. May your gratitude be spontaneous. And most of all, may your faith be unbreakable and undeniable.